Just coming back to you, Ato Frezer. So when it comes to any thinking that has happened so far in NB in incentivizing giving loans to those that have, a pro-climate agenda, is there any kind of discussion that's happening in NB right now? Or like you mentioned, are we first starting off by saying, let's really understand this landscape and let's build our capacity around it?
So far, actually, as a national bank, we have been working in terms of getting funds for green finance and channeling that fund to the businesses that are working on this issue. So a good example will be the solar energy that we are implementing in this country. So as a government, we have attracted fund that's channeled through the Ministry of Finance, and that fund has been given to the Development Bank of Ethiopia, which is one of the DFI, for wholesaling, for all lending purpose to the different financial institutions. So we have, programs similar to that, where, projects that are related to climate are being, financed adequately. But this kind of, initiatives need to be guided through sort of strategy where, all these, things can be streamlined and be effective.
Thank you. Before I open it up to some questions, just one last one to you, Ato Zerihun. When it comes to any accountability framework that's been set up either through CRGE or other policies for high polluter industries or companies, I can name a few, I won't, but the likes of the aviation industry, the construction industry are very high polluting industries. I'm just curious, is there any thinking within the CRGE plan of how you hold them accountable or how you allow them to contribute back into this climate financing scheme?
Thank you. Well, the Ethiopian government has, in general, as we all know, the EIA policy, environmental impact assessment policy on for industries in general, for businesses and so on. So that mandate was originally with Ethiopian Environmental Authority, EPA. Then it was decentralized to the sectors. If an investor goes to invest in agriculture sector, then it used to be the Ministry of Agriculture that also does the EIA assessment. But now that mandate is revoked and is back to the EPA. EPA is one area, and in general that looks into a number of aspects, the impact of the project on the society, on the environment, and so on. So, well, I mean, you can mention the vehicle import policy which was adopted a couple of years ago, which discourages actually importing old vehicles, particularly if you import old vehicle, then you have to pay a lot of tax, maybe up to 400% if it is older than 7 years. So that's, I hope recently most of you have noticed that I think the import of used cars has almost stopped. This is a very important policy that the government took. The other is the incentive for importing electric cars that the government has adopted as well. So in the Ministry of Finance, we are also, we have already, as CRGE Facility, we have prepared a concept note and submitted to the management of the Ministry of Finance to put in place a vehicle emission tax regime, to kind of charge vehicle owners for the externalities they cause on public, so that can be used for some offsetting their emissions. So we have this, I think it has got positive acceptance by the management, and the tax directorate in the Ministry of Finance is working with development partners, most likely IMF and the World Bank, to how to take this forward. That's one important policy direction I can mention. The other is the issue of, globally, under the Paris Agreement, there is a famous article called Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which talks about international cooperation in terms of not only, facilitating payment for emission, but also strengthening collaboration at international level. So for that, we are working to put in place Article 6 governance structure, because one of the requirement is to engage international carbon trading. A country should have a proper governance structure. So for that, we are working on that. I think part of the challenge that was mentioned earlier regarding, for example, how to do carbon, selling or engaging in carbon trading as a private sector and so on. But the Ministry of Finance is the one that actually signs emission purchase agreement. Even so, for the Oromia Red Plus, it is the Ministry of Finance, and there is also proper benefit sharing mechanism that is put in place. And even maybe some of you know that Farm Africa has collaborated with Oromia Forest and Wildlife to kind of sell carbon credits from the Bali forest. So the community they are benefiting from this, and so there are some policy measures, but still we need to really, because there are a number of channels through which international climate finance flows, not only in a form of grant, loans, and so on, but also through carbon trading. So for that, we have to get ready, and part of this readiness is establishing proper institutional structure for Article 6 under the Paris Agreement, because we have to do also corresponding adjustments. This is a term, because whenever we sell, we have to make sure that we don't count also in our emission reduction reporting. So for that, this institutional arrangement is very crucial. So we are working on that as a Ministry of Finance, as CRGE Facility. Yeah, these are some of the things I can say.
Very comprehensive, and thank you for bringing up incentives around electric vehicles. I'm sure for those who are driving around at DCC, a lot of those these days. And that's a great example of how you can build some of those accountability frameworks. So we've heard a lot around how regulation, especially through the respective institutions that Ato Frezer have, can make Ethiopia a very competitive landscape for climate financing. But we've also heard a lot around what we can do better, how we can start, through perspectives that Sandy has brought from Kenya. So with that, we're going to give you an opportunity to ask 2 questions. So if you don't mind just raising your hand. Okay, so a gentleman on my left, on my center, and I think Ato Ermias also has one question.
My name is Ndodzo Mawera from Genesis Analytics. Genesis is essentially an economics and climate finance advisory firm to commercial banks and development organizations. My question is directly to the NBE. It's good to hear that the NBE is thinking around regulatory frameworks that support risk capital modeling for commercial banks. I guess one of the key issues for us and what we're trying to understand is what capacities is the NBE building to specifically target the data challenge that comes with modeling climate risk events, unlike credit risk as well as ALM risk as well as market risk. Climate events and climate risk is more forward-looking, and a big challenge has been around getting data that can predict when those particular events will take place and affect the balance sheets of commercial banks. So the first question is around what capacity are you building or supporting financial institutions in being able to forecast that risk? And then the second question is really around the roadmap. So I heard you mention a project that you're working with the World Bank, specifically that speaks to how you're going to be approaching your regulatory frameworks that you'll be giving to commercial banks. Is there any roadmap that we can expect around when these regulatory frameworks will be available for the market, and any indication as to what are some of the lessons and insights that are coming out at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. My name is Nicholas Mason Clements. I'm the climate lead at the British Embassy. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for convening such a great event, and just to say we really welcome the report as well, and really enjoying the conversation. My question is to the panel. Obviously, developing partners like ourselves have an important role to play in providing climate finance. But I would like to hear your reflections in sort of most practical terms. Where do you see the most value added by developing partners in supporting countries like Ethiopia in accessing climate finance? Thank you very much.
A very interesting reflection by the panelists. I have a few questions to the panelists from the Ministry of Finance, and some general questions for Sam. My first question is I come from a private bank, and I was trying to make sense out of this presentation, and I have to ask a couple of questions about private sector engagement in climate finance. We had a couple of implementation in RED Plus as well as FMNR projects that have been very successful, but they fell through the cracks. No scaling up, and no interest in expanding them. This discourages private banks from getting involved in this kind of finance. What is the Ministry of Finance trying to do to elevate this? The second question goes to Kenyan experience sharing. What have Kenya done good in scaling up RED Plus as well as FMNR projects, if they have one? The third question goes to the bamboo experience. And we are said to have a very expanded resources in the bamboo forest area. And what advice do you give to our regulators and the government in terms of expanding that resource to improving livelihood as well as creating job? Eventually, I guess, climate finance is as important as it is in creating jobs as well as improving livelihood. Thank you.
Very packed questions. So just to make sure that we have time to address all of them, do try to keep it to a minute or two, just to at least be able to summarize, and we'll always have an opportunity during our networking event to have a deeper conversation on this. So I'll start with you, Frezer.
Thank you. I think the first question was directed to me, and it's about risk-based capital. Yes, as a regulator, we always need to look for the financial institutions to have adequate capital, that caters, the risk profile. So far, we have been implementing, under, what you call a Basel I capital requirement, where, only the credit risk is being catered. But right now we are moving to introducing a Basel II capital framework where, within the Basel II capital framework, there are different pillars. And within the first pillar, we are going to require the banks to put additional capital that will cater for, additional risks like operational risks and their market risk on top of the credit risk. And going forward, there is also a requirement to let each bank, to implement what you call an ICAP, internal capital adequacy assessment, process. And in that process, and based on the risk assessment model that we are going to build on, then the issue of climate risk needs to be addressed accordingly. So the risks that the banks are facing from climate risk needs to be factored in the determination of the minimum capital that they need to have in their balance sheet. With regard to the roadmap and the regulatory guidance, As I said, we have just started, this initiative with the World Bank, and as we move along, it will be a very consultative process where we will be engaging, all the stakeholders that are found within the industry, and then when we are going to issue, this regulatory guidance, it will be made public for all stakeholders through the available channels we have. But so far, as a central bank, since it's not yet finalized, so there is nothing to be shared to the stakeholders. But as it gets done, it will be shared for the stakeholders and the general public as well.
Yeah, thank you. Just to chip into the data challenge on climate events and capacity of financial institutions, I'll give an example of Rabobank, which is a financial institution we are working with to implement carbon projects. What I've seen the bank do is they've invested in technology such as GIS, where some of the projects they're implementing in Africa, they actually have people on the ground who are taking coordinates, and they have this data center where they kind of monitor the biomass in certain areas where they're interested. And this has helped them in terms of making sure that if we are pushing for an agroforestry agenda, for example, they can tell the level of biomass in wherever they are implementing their projects. Yeah. So in terms of the climate shocks, I think banks will need to sort of elevate their level of technology and adopt, some of those kind of platforms to make sure that, if they're financing a farmer, for example, they can tell, by the level of biomass, if the farmers' fields are still, having the biomass that they should have based on the financing that has been extended. And, that is a way that, data can be gathered and be used to sort of make sure that our solutions for climate are better. And then the next one was the value addition from developing partners to support countries like Ethiopia access climate financing. I think one of the most critical aspect of climate finance is its ability to support, the real economic activities. And once we understand that, climate finance has that capacity in terms of propagating the sustainable development agenda, in terms of, charting a green and a low carbon pathway, and also in terms of enabling communities to be more resilient, then, one of the biggest things that development partners can do is to help countries like Ethiopia to really rationalize their adaptation and mitigation proposals, to ensure that, these proposals are actually going to real community benefits and real economic activities. Because what I've seen with climate finance is when you are accessing financing from, facilities like the GCF or the Global Environment Facility or, the Adaptation Fund, your adaptation rationale has to be very clear, and it has to be very directly linked with, real economic activities. If you're looking at building community resilience, then, what is the rationale? And I think that is something that the big development partners who support some of our work can really step in and ensure that some of the proposals that are going towards those kind of funding, have the right kind of rationale to generate the right kind of impact. And then I think the last question was on scaling up RED Plus projects in Kenya. I think in terms of forestry and forestry kind of activities, the government is taking, the lead, where Kenya currently has a target of, taking the forestry cover back to 10%. And, there are a lot of activities that have gone into that. And one of the things that has really excited me is an opportunity to sort of catalyze this kind of projects through innovative financing, where we've been in discussions with some people in some of the Kenyan ministries, environment, finance, treasury, and we're looking at activating a carbon-secured, sustainability-linked instrument to sort of improve the forest cover in the country. And this is important because when you look at the African context, there's a lot of debt sustainability issues at the moment. So if we're able to tap into the current natural resources that we have and activate some of those instruments, then it makes and it eases some of the physical pressures that, some of the countries have in terms of debt, in terms of interest rates, in terms of inflation, because we're saying that, this natural resource is ideally helping the global footprint of carbon reduction. So why can't we tap into it through some form of an instrument and see how that money can be used to sort of elevate those kind of projects and trickle down to, community activities and building community resilience to ensure that, we have an active community that is still contributing to the national development agenda. Yeah.
Briefly on what value add have development partners in terms of supporting Ethiopia to access climate finance. I actually agree to the point that was raised earlier, but development partner, most of the development partners also are providers of climate finance. So I think one area I would say is, increasing or improving the provision of finance by itself is important, meeting the commitments, and then also, you guys also sit in the boards of, many of these financial institutions. So, our projects, proposals, our issues ultimately come to you for decision. So that's also where you can honestly support us. Sometimes getting project proposal approved by boards of these climate finance providers is also a challenge. The other is, the issue of capacity building, capacity in terms of preparing project proposals, capacity in implementing approved project proposals is also very important. I think also to really encourage private sectors from your countries also to come to our countries and invest, providing the right information and the data is also very important. On the issue from the related with pilot projects, the lack of scaling up those pilot projects, I would say, I think the Ministry of Finance, actually in collaboration with others, is responsible for monetary and fiscal policies, preparing, designing, and so on. So I think we expect, I would say, the Ministry of Finance doesn't know why really scaling up is not take place. So it's up to us collectively to find out why this is not happening and just trying to communicate through proper channels so that relevant policies or, if there is a need to improve existing ones or, adopt new ones as well is very important. So I don't know, the question, the gap has to be identified. Part of, we have seen earlier in the morning that there are some barriers even when it comes to climate finance, domestic related policy, regulatory related barriers. So it is important to properly identify, document, properly compile the evidence and communicate it to the decision makers. For your information, we are just engaged in supporting the commercial bank and the Development Bank of Ethiopia to be accredited by the Green Climate Fund so that they can access the private sector window of the Green Climate Fund. So this is an area where we are really helping because we see that there is an opportunity out there to be, tapped into.
The private sector plays a really big role to actually implement any of these initiatives. So I know we're a bit short on time. We only have 1 minute. Oh, okay. One more question, and then we're going to wrap this up. But we will have a networking event where you can meet our panelists and get more in depth. So this goes to Sam. You've worked in Ethiopia, operated in different capacities. What do you feel Ethiopia is really missing out on when it comes to climate financing through the business that you're doing?
Ooh, that's a difficult question. I think for us, it's around risk management and certainty. I mean, again, carbon for us is the real, ability to unlock, and it's always a bit difficult to know what products we have and how we can sell them. I think, there's always this balance between trying to solve short-term and long-term problems here. Forex is the one that's on all of our minds, I'm sure, on this panel and in the room. And for example, we have things like the 70-30 rule, where it's trying to get more Forex into the country in the near term, right? Which of course also incentivizes many companies. We're not operational, so it's not us, but to offshore. Right, and we know the problems that Ethiopia has with transfer pricing and other things that create huge deficits in foreign exchange. So it's always finding this balance for us around solving those short-term problems and opening up long-term opportunities. One for us that we've talked about in capital markets is capital gains tax. For us, capital gains tax. If you want to list a product on the Ethiopian market, and capital gains tax is 40%. In places like Luxembourg are offering capital gains tax of 10%, 5%. Where does it make a fiduciary responsibility to list? It's hard to list in Ethiopia and have a delta of 30% tax in addition to international markets. So for us, there's this incentive that we really want to be an Ethiopian company that goes to the world, and you see a lot of companies trying to do that. For us, the challenge really is trying to find those incentives and those processes that'll enable us to be here and to be a global company from Ethiopia.
I assume as a startup, you have investors that push you towards that direction as well.
We have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize profit, as people mentioned, right? And that's a challenge.
Thank you. Sorry to cut it very short, but I'm going to pass it to Ato Ermias for a second.
Just before you wrap up, I wanted to put Sandy on the spot. Sandy, FSD Africa played a pivotal role to put together the Africa Natural Capital Alliance. And to that extent, what would be your advice for the private sector and the policymakers to be part and parcel of that alliance? That's for you, Sandy, just so that you can share a little bit of that. And my other question out of Frezer from the National Bank is really, when it comes to governance, what would you advise for the private sector actors, financial service providers, to bring this to the top of their agenda, to dive into climate finance issue? It's a hot topic. There is huge resources in our country to leverage our natural capital, to access carbon markets, etc. So in terms of supervision and influencing change in the mindset of the financiers, are you planning to guide or and perhaps direct financial service providers to bring this on the top of their agenda? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Emias. Yeah, FSD Africa put together, the African Natural Capital Alliance, and ideally, this alliance is meant to bring to the fore, the real value of nature in terms of driving economic activities and in terms of driving some of the private sector activities that we see. And I'll just give an example of, if you're an investor in real estate in Ethiopia today, and it doesn't bother you that, river systems and forest ecosystems should be managed, you should be really worried, because for your real estate investment to give you the return that you're looking for, there are several pieces of the puzzle that need to be met. And one of the most critical one is access to water. Yeah. So, this kind of an alliance is sort of bringing out that narrative that, we have to ensure that, the private sector and all the activities are actually linked to the natural ecosystems, where if we don't manage some of those ecosystems, then, the private sector is going to be impacted. And the impact on the private sector will trickle into, the impacts on the government. It will trickle into the impacts of the communities that we are serving. So it is very, very important that, you know, we sort of piece the dots and look at the value chain in a more holistic way, and ideally look at the real value of nature in terms of driving, you know, private sector and economic activities. So I think it would be good to see, you know, more private sector players join this alliance. It would be good to see them actually not just join, but also take part in some of the activities, you know, that this alliance is actually pushing for. And, you know, I think there's a huge opportunity. When I look at, this was my first time in Ethiopia, and the rate of urbanization is actually quite overwhelming. So I hope, you know, there's those kind of plans sort of being driven from the regulator's point and sort of being self-driven from the private sector point.
Okay, thank you for the question, to Hermes. I think the financial sector has, you know, huge responsibility in terms of first managing, you know, climate-related risks, and second, it has also a huge role in terms of mobilizing, you know, capital for green and low carbon emission, you know, projects. So for this to happen, there are a number of things that need to happen at macro and at industry or private sector level. So if we look at some of the things that need to happen at macro level, I think we need to have, you know, some sort of strategy on climate and green finance strategy that is mainstream from the, you know, the national climate, you know, strategy that we have. So we need to have a strategy that's focused on the climate and green finance strategy. And as a nation, we need to also expand our international, you know, networking. You know, we need to bring, you know, different actors that are working on this spectrum to our advantage. And then, as I said, we need to also develop some sort of supervisory tools that will help, you know, to guide our financial sector to addressing, you know, the issue of, you know, climate and environment. And the other issue is, you know, we don't have, you know, instruments that will help, you know, us to raise, you know, finance from the financial market. So we need to be able to develop, you know, various, you know, financial instruments that will allow us, you know, to attract more capital from the financial market. As you know, we are developing, you know, our capital market, and one of the issue that needs to be looked at is, you know, how can we bring more capital towards this climate related issue. So these are the sort of issues that need to be done at macro level. With regard to, you know, the private sector or the industry level, it all boils down to the issue of being conscious about the issue of climate and environment, and they need to build, you know, capacity within their internal, you know, structure, and they also need to, you know, have some standard or ESG standards on environment, social, and governance standards. So that's how they can be accredited, you know, like what my colleague said, internationally, and that's how they will be more in a position, you know, to attract capital flowing into their, you know, system. And the other final point will be, you know, they need to have the capacity in terms of, you know, coming up with products that are, you know, climate resilient. So if, you know, these two things are, you know, worked out, you know, the things that need to be done at macro level, and then the things that need to be done at, you know, industry or private sector level, I think we'll be in a better position in terms of, you know, addressing this issue, and, you know, to a broader level.
Thank you. So we're going to close this off with a question I'll ask all of you. But before I do, I'm sure for those of you who follow international news, a lot of the headlines that you read are about a looming financial crisis. But there was one report that came through that just slipped everybody's radar, and that is a report by the International Panel of Climate Change. This is a report that comes out to say, where are we right now as humanity to actually address climate change? For the first time, the title read, A Survival Guide for Humanity. So we're no longer in a place where we're just trying to be proactive, but there's urgency right now to do something because it's almost too late. This is a global issue, but it's also an issue here in Ethiopia. And I think we see that through droughts that are occurring. And this report basically says this might become our norm unless we do something about it. So this is no longer theoretical. As somber as it is a call for action and urgency. And with that in mind, the one question I want to ask each one of you is, within the work that you do, what do you find to be the next important and urgent next step?
I think from my perspective, addressing the issue of, climate, particularly climate finance, is not something that is it's nice to have thing, right? So we need to really address it because, as you said, we have been facing, the impact of climate through, different, things like recurrent drought, flood, and things like that. And the risk is also popping up, within our financial system in terms of their credit, quality and things like that. So for that reason, I think we need to exert, maximum effort in terms of addressing these issues that are, popping up. That might even go to the extent of, being a threat to the sustainability of our financial system.
Yeah, thank you. I think the IPCC report, explicitly says that, human activity is actually endangering the lives of all of us. And in my closing remarks, I want to just say that, school rewards the best students, but then life rewards the best learners. Yeah, I think we are all here. We've exchanged a lot of ideas, and we've learned from each other. So I think for me, the next urgent steps is for us to really practice, all the learning that, we are taking through such kind of forums. And I want to say that, organizations like FSD Africa provide technical assistance to sort of support some of these initiatives. So if we take a practical approach and a proactive approach, we can sort of be part of the solution story because the support is there. So the onus is on us to just take the proactive approach and sort of implement the learnings that we are receiving in such kind of forums.
Yeah, so as someone who is coming from Ministry of Finance, we need to enhance our resource mobilization capability, and we need to also, leverage the engagement of private sector on climate change mitigation and adaptation investment. I would like to indicate that at the Ministry of Finance, currently, as I speak here, we are adopting or establishing a special fund at the Ministry of Finance, where the government allocates up to 1% of its annual budget to this special fund, and this special fund will be used for restoring our degraded landscapes, which is really an issue and important for us. So the government is doing its level best to, and globally there is this reforming the financial system is one of the key outcomes of the Glasgow COP. So without reforming the financial system, then we can't achieve the temperature goal or these risks associated with climate crisis. So in that regard, we are also doing budget tagging and the tracking system in the Ministry of Finance, where we can actually measure how much Ethiopia as a country is investing from its domestic resource allocation from Treasury. So we need to enhance our response actions, and we need to also keep on mobilizing, and we need to also strengthen our regulatory and policy framework in order to enhance engagement of private sector, as well as even mobilize more resource. Yeah.
I want to build on that a little bit. Yeah, I know you framed this as a looming disaster, and of course it is from a global perspective, but I also am actually very optimistic as a private sector sitting here in Ethiopia. As someone who used to work in the Ethiopian government and in the private sector, I maybe have a unique perspective on this, which is generally we think of the private sector's relationship with policymakers here as adversarial. I actually think this is a really great area of collaboration that we're all really aligned on. And specifically around, companies like ours can create jobs, solve the climate crisis, in our own niche, create Forex, and really build the country in the right way. And I think that that's a real opportunity to work hand in hand with government. We need government support, and not necessarily financial support, just regulatory support to enable us to reach out into the future and grab some of these opportunities. We think we can provide some of the things that the government has identified as priorities, Forex, jobs, et cetera. And I think that collaboration is really a source of optimism for me. But the urgency and what do we need to do is to really move from these broad frameworks to some of these tangible dotting and crossing of I's and T's, because from the privates, what do we worry about as a company? If I take off my environment hat for a second, it's making sure we're tax compliant. It's making sure that we can export the things that we say we need to export. It's when we list a bond, making sure that it can be within the rules of the NBE, that we're not violating international debt agreements and processes. So these types of things, if those things fall apart, right? If we show up to IRCA at the end of the year and we have a tax bill 3 times what we anticipated, people will know. And it's hard for me to sit on a panel 3 or 4 years from now and say, oh yeah, great, this works really well, but we had an extra $100 million or 100 million birr tax bill. So certainty and these things can only be sort of achieved if we work hand in hand to make sure that the processes are there. And if things don't go exactly as we anticipate, which they never do, that there's some leniency, that we can have that as a working dialogue with policymakers to make sure that those things are implemented and iterated. Maybe there's a sandbox approach where you're allowed to sort of innovate. These are the things that I think will make the real difference in the future.
On that optimistic note, thank you so much for taking the time to spend time with us, share your knowledge and experience, also have a very engaging dialogue, and hope you stay for lunch so that the rest of the audience could speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for our panelists, please. I cannot express my gratitude. We have the policymakers, the private sector, we have our practitioner from Kenya, all together talking about a new economic opportunity for Ethiopia. The message is clear, the potential is huge, there are challenges, but we can work through it. Sam talked about his project and the number of jobs being created, the entrepreneurship opportunities, potential financial sector deepening and financial inclusion for women needs all the support we can give. The same with Kudus, is claiming environmental waste and transforming it into a construction input. Potential foreign currency generation capacity. It's some exciting things for us to be able to think about foreign currency, generate the opportunity to generate foreign currency from carbon trading, things like that. So it's very, very exciting. So thank you all for wonderful conversation we had just a moment ago. So thank you. With that note, I think I'm just in between lunch and a wrap up. My final note is this. I think for all of you to take a note of, I think our role as FSD Ethiopia is really to bring together the key actors in the financial sector, deepening work and financial market efficiency, making the financial markets efficient. We will continue to bring a number of series ahead of us. And I'm happy to announce the very next session will be on investment banking. I think we will have a very distinguished speakers coming from London. Craig Coben, a very senior Financial Times contributor from London, and possibly another distinguished guest. Craig was the Merlin Lynch global head for investment banking, and he will be here in Addis talking about investment banking along with others. So mark the date, announcements will be made, and we'll register attendances. And we'll also continue to have different sessions on the various pillars in digital financial systems. We're working on a number of initiatives in collaboration with the National Bank on national financial inclusion and others. So we'll announce those as and when we have clarity on those sessions. With that note, thank you so much once again for our panelists for making the effort. Sandy, thank you so much for making the trips also all the way from Nairobi, and Kudus also for making it this morning just on time. So thank you so much.